The streets of New Orleans were alive that evening, buzzing with energy as neon signs flickered and the aroma of street food drifted through the air. A jazz band played a few blocks away, their brass instruments wailing through the night, while tourists wandered the sidewalks, drawn to the city's vibrant charm. Among the chaos, near a quiet corner of Jackson Square, a young woman stood with a violin in her hands, her presence a stark contrast to the city's restless rhythm. Mia Harper closed her eyes for a moment, letting the familiar weight of her instrument settle against her chin. The city had been her stage for years, the cracked pavement her foundation, the flickering streetlights her spotlight. Every night, she played for passers-by, hoping for enough tips to get by. Some stayed to listen, some dropped a few bills in her worn violin case without a glance. And then there were those rare moments that reminded her why she played at all. Tonight was different. As she lifted her bow and pulled the first note from the strings, she noticed him, a boy, no older than 10, sitting in a wheelchair near the curb. He was alone, or at least, there was no one immediately beside him. His eyes, wide and unblinking, were locked onto her, not with the casual curiosity of a passerby, but with something deeper. A quiet yearning. Mia hesitated for just a fraction of a second before adjusting her posture. The boy hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but she could feel his presence like a ripple in the air. She played for him. The melody she chose was soft, delicate, filled with emotion, a piece she had learned long ago, one that always carried a whisper of something unspoken. As the music floated through the cool night air, something remarkable happened. The boy, who had been so still, so silent, began to move. It wasn't much at first, a small twitch of his fingers against the armrest of his chair. Then slowly, his foot, stiff and hesitant, tapped ever so slightly against the metal footplate. Mia's heart clenched. She didn't know why, but something about the way he responded to the music made her throat tighten. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, he was allowing himself to feel something. Unbeknownst to her, a man watched from a distance. Inside a sleek black car parked just a few feet away, Adrian Montgomery sat with his hands clasped, his sharp gaze fixed on the scene before him. He had only stopped at the red light, distracted by a business call, when his eyes had been drawn to his son. Oliver. The boy who had once been full of life, who had once run through their vast backyard with endless energy, who had once laughed freely. That boy had been gone for a long time, replaced by silence and empty stares. Adrian had spent a fortune on therapy, on specialists, on anything money could buy to bring his son back to the world. But nothing had worked. Not until now. He watched, his pulse quickening, as Oliver's foot moved to the rhythm of the violin. His son, who had refused to engage with anything or anyone, was responding to this music. To this street musician. The light turned green. Adrian's driver hesitated, waiting for instructions, but Adrian didn't speak. He just kept watching. As the song came to an end, Mia lowered her violin, her breath catching as she looked at Oliver. For the first time that night, the boy lifted his gaze to meet hers, and in those deep brown eyes, she saw something shift. A spark. A connection. Adrian Montgomery exhaled, barely realizing he had been holding his breath. And in that moment he knew, this woman, this street musician, had just done something no doctor or therapist had been able to do. And he needed to find out why. The next morning, as sunlight filtered through the narrow gaps between the old brick buildings, Mia Harper stretched her stiff fingers and reached for her violin case. The previous night's performance still lingered in her mind. The boy in the wheelchair, his quiet fascination, the way his foot had moved to the music. She had played for countless strangers, but something about that moment felt different. As she zipped up her case, her phone vibrated on the small nightstand beside her bed. A message. Unknown number, I saw what you did last night. Meet me at Le Jardin Café at 2 p.m. It's important. Mia frowned. The text was brief, to the point, and offered no explanation. She glanced at the sender. No name, just a string of numbers. Her first instinct was to ignore it. Street musicians like her didn't receive invitations to high-end cafes. The name alone, Le Jardin, screamed exclusivity. It was the kind of place where tech executives sipped imported espresso, not where violinists who played for tips were invited for casual meetings. And yet, curiosity tugged at her. Was this about the boy? Her pulse quickened. Mia stared at the message a moment longer, then exhaled. Against her better judgment, she typed a single word in reply, "Okay." Mia hesitated at the entrance of Le Jardin Café, her fingers tightening around the strap of her violin case. The café was exactly as she had imagined, elegant, with polished mahogany tables and soft jazz humming in the background. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint aroma of vanilla, creating an atmosphere that felt worlds apart from the bustling streets where she usually played. A waiter approached, but before she could speak, a voice called her name. Mia Harper. She turned to see a man seated at a corner table, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. His presence was commanding, sharp features, piercing gaze, but it was his eyes that caught her attention. They weren't cold, as she had expected. They carried something else. A weight. She cautiously took a seat across from him. "My name is Adrian Montgomery," he began, his voice smooth but laced with something restrained. "You played for my son last night." Mia blinked. His son? Oliver. He exhaled, as if saying the name carried its own burden. Since his accident, he hasn't reacted to anything. No words, no emotions. But last night, he moved to your music. Adrian leaned forward slightly, studying her. "I need to understand why." Mia swallowed. She wasn't sure she had an answer. But something told her this meeting was only the beginning. Mia stared at Adrian, certain she had misheard him. "You want me to teach Oliver?" she repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. Adrian nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yes. As his music teacher." Mia let out a short, nervous laugh. "I think you have the wrong person. I'm just a street musician. I don't have degrees or credentials in music education." "I don't care about credentials," Adrian said firmly. "I care about results." He leaned forward, his fingers laced together. "I've hired the best therapists, educators. None of them have made a difference. But last night, for the first time in years, my son responded to something. That wasn't a coincidence." Mia's heart pounded. She wasn't sure whether to feel flattered or overwhelmed. A billionaire was sitting across from her, offering her a job she never would have imagined. And yet, doubt crept in. Could she really help Oliver? Seeing her hesitation, Adrian continued, his voice softer this time. "Just try. A few sessions. If it doesn't work, I won't ask again." Mia exhaled slowly, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. Against all logic, against all her own self-doubt, she found herself nodding. "Okay," she whispered. And just like that, her life changed forever. Mia gripped the handle of her violin case, her mind racing. This was insane. She was a street musician, not a trained instructor. She had never taught anyone, let alone a child who had withdrawn from the world. What if she failed? What if she made things worse? Adrian Montgomery sat across from her, his gaze unwavering. He had built an empire in the tech industry, a man used to control, to certainty. But here he was, placing his trust in her. "I don't think I'm the right person for this," Mia admitted, shaking her head. "I play music, I don't teach it." Adrian studied her for a moment before responding. "Oliver doesn't need a teacher. He needs someone who can reach him. Last night, you did that." Mia bit her lip. It was true, she had seen something in Oliver's eyes that she couldn't explain. A flicker of life. A connection. And she couldn't ignore that. Taking a deep breath, she looked up at Adrian. "I don't know if I can help him," she said honestly. "But I want to try." For the first time, Adrian's expression softened. "Then that's enough." Mia exhaled, feeling the weight of her decision settle over her. She had just stepped into a world far beyond the streets of New Orleans. Mia had seen mansions before, on TV, in magazines, in passing glimpses through iron gates. But nothing could have prepared her for the sheer scale of the Montgomery estate. The car rolled through the grand entrance, its tires whispering against the immaculate driveway. Towering oak trees lined the path, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, casting long shadows across the pristine lawn. The mansion itself was a masterpiece of modern architecture, sleek glass panels, marble columns, and a grand staircase that spiraled toward a second-floor balcony. But despite its beauty, something felt off. Mia stepped inside, expecting warmth, life. Instead, the vast foyer stretched before her like an art gallery, cold, polished, empty. The air smelled of expensive wood polish and fresh-cut flowers, yet there was no laughter, no sound of footsteps, no sign of a home. She swallowed hard, her violin case suddenly feeling heavier. Adrian led the way, his movements precise, rehearsed. "Oliver's room is this way," he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Mia followed, her eyes tracing the walls adorned with expensive paintings, pristine furniture, and gleaming chandeliers. It was all perfect. Too perfect. This wasn't a house, it was a museum. And Oliver, somewhere within these walls, was its loneliest exhibit. The moment Mia stepped into the grand hallway, she felt it, the weight of silent judgment pressing against her like an invisible force. It wasn't loud or confrontational. It was subtle, lingering in the way the staff barely concealed their skepticism, in the way conversations quieted when she passed. She didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. At the far end of the corridor, a woman in a crisp navy blue suit stood with her arms crossed. Her silver-rimmed glasses rested at the edge of her nose, and her expression was unreadable, though Mia could sense the underlying disapproval. "Miss Harper," the woman said, her voice clipped. "I'm Evelyn Carter, Oliver's educational consultant." Mia extended a hand, but Evelyn didn't take it. Instead, she adjusted her glasses and continued, "Mr. Montgomery has made some unconventional decisions before, but I must admit, hiring an uncredentialed musician to educate his son is a new one." Before Mia could respond, a tall, stern-looking man in a tailored vest stepped forward. "The house manager," she assumed. "Oliver's schedule is carefully structured. I hope you won't disrupt it." Mia clenched her jaw but forced a smile. "I'm here to help, not to disrupt." Neither of them looked convinced. She had barely arrived, and already, she was fighting to prove she belonged. Mia sat on the edge of the piano bench, her violin resting lightly against her shoulder. Across from her, Oliver Montgomery sat in his wheelchair, staring at the floor. His small hands rested motionless in his lap, his expression unreadable. She had been here for nearly a week, and still, he had barely acknowledged her presence. No words. No eye contact. Nothing. Most people would have given up by now. Instead, Mia lifted her bow and began to play. Not a structured lesson. Not scales or drills. Just music. Soft, wandering notes filled the room, rising and falling like waves. She let the melody flow without restriction, allowing instinct to guide her. It wasn't about teaching, it was about feeling. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed the slightest movement. Oliver's fingers twitched. It was so small, so fleeting, that Mia might have missed it if she hadn't been watching. But she was watching. And she saw the way his body tensed ever so slightly, as if his mind was caught somewhere between resistance and curiosity. She didn't stop playing. And she didn't force him to respond. She simply let the music be there, waiting for him, whenever he was ready. Mia barely had time to set her violin down before Adrian's voice cut through the quiet room. "This isn't working." She turned to see him standing in the doorway, arms crossed, his expression hard as stone. He wasn't yelling, but there was something sharper in his tone, doubt. Mia exhaled slowly, already anticipating the argument. "You saw him today," she said, keeping her voice steady. He moved his fingers. He was listening. Adrian shook his head. That's not progress. That's a reaction. You play a song, and he twitches. That doesn't mean he's getting better. Mia felt frustration tighten in her chest. What does better even mean to you? She asked, stepping closer. Do you want him to suddenly start talking? To stand up and walk? That's not how this works. I want something that's proven. Adrian's jaw clenched. I've spent years following the best medical advice, therapy, rehabilitation, experts. And now you're telling me that music is the answer. Mia met his gaze, unwavering. I'm telling you that it's something he feels, she said. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, that's enough. Adrian didn't respond. But he didn't walk away either. Mia knew something was wrong the moment she stepped into the mansion. The usual quiet hum of the estate had been replaced by a suffocating tension, thick and unspoken. Then she saw Adrian. He stood near the grand staircase, his expression unreadable, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. But it wasn't just his posture that unsettled her, it was his eyes. Cold. Unforgiving. What's going on? Mia asked cautiously. Adrian took a slow breath, then tossed a manila envelope onto the nearby table. You tell me. Frowning, Mia hesitated before picking it up. Inside were photographs, grainy, taken from a distance. But the message was clear. In each one she was there, meeting with a well-dressed man, exchanging words, shaking hands. Recognition struck like a bolt of lightning. She knew that man. Henry Caldwell, one of Adrian's most notorious business rivals. Mia's stomach twisted. You think I'm working for him? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrian's jaw tightened. I think you're taking money from him. Shock turned to anger. You actually believe this? She demanded. After everything? Adrian didn't answer right away. And that silence hurt more than any accusation. Mia barely had time to process the accusation before Adrian's voice cut through the silence, sharp and final. I want you out. Her breath caught in her throat. What? Adrian's expression was unreadable, but his tone was ice-cold. I don't want you near Oliver. I don't want you in this house. Whatever game you're playing, whatever act this has been, it ends now. Mia's chest tightened. You think this was an act? Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with frustration. You think I planned this? That I spent weeks trying to reach Oliver just to, what? Get close to your money. Adrian didn't flinch. I don't know what to think anymore. That hurt more than the accusation itself. Mia took a shaky step forward. Look at me, Adrian. You know me. Do you really believe I would do that? For a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes, hesitation, doubt, but then just as quickly it was gone. I did believe you, he said, his voice quieter this time. But I can't take that risk. Mia swallowed the lump in her throat. She wanted to fight. She wanted to scream. But the look in his eyes told her it wouldn't matter. So, with a heart heavier than her violin case, she turned and walked away. Mia stood frozen in the middle of the grand study, her pulse pounding in her ears. Across from her, Adrian paced, his jaw tight, his movements sharp with barely restrained anger. It wasn't just photographs, he said, his voice clipped. One of my senior executives claims they saw you take money from Henry Caldwell. Mia's stomach twisted. That's a lie. Adrian scoffed, shaking his head. Then tell me, why were you meeting with him at all? Mia clenched her fists. He approached me after one of my performances. He asked me to play for one of his events. That's it. Adrian's expression darkened. And you took the money. Mia felt a wave of frustration crash over her. It was a tip, Adrian. He handed me cash, just like dozens of other people do when I play on the street. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. I didn't know who he was until after the fact. Adrian studied her, his eyes scanning for any sign of deceit. For the first time, she saw something other than anger in his face, hurt. I want to believe you, he admitted, his voice softer now. But I can't ignore this. Mia's chest ached. She wasn't just fighting an accusation. She was fighting a man who had already convinced himself she was guilty. Mia sat in her tiny apartment, staring at the crumpled photographs on the table. The accusations, the cold dismissal from Adrian, the way he had looked at her, like she was just another person trying to use him, played over and over in her mind. She had every right to walk away. But she couldn't. Not because of her own pride, not even because of Adrian, but because of Oliver. The boy who had started to trust her. The boy she had promised to help. Mia exhaled, her fingers tightening into fists. Someone had set her up. Someone wanted her gone. And she wasn't about to let them win. Reaching for her phone, she scrolled through old messages, contacts, anything that might give her a lead. She thought back to the last few days at the Montgomery estate. The whispered conversations, the sideways glances, the one thing that had felt off but hadn't made sense at the time. Then it hit her. The tension between Adrian's executives. The way Evelyn Carter, the cold, calculating education consultant, had subtly questioned her presence from the very start. Mia's heart pounded. If there was anyone who had motive to see her gone, to discredit her in Adrian's eyes, it was her. And now, Mia was going to prove it. Mia sat in the dimly lit cafe, her laptop open, fingers hovering over the keyboard. She had spent the last 2 days digging, combing through every bit of information she could find on Adrian's company, his business dealings, and most importantly, the people around him. She knew the answer was there, buried beneath the surface. She just had to find it. And then she did. Her breath caught as she scanned the screen. A series of private business correspondences, leaked anonymously on a financial forum, hinted at a hostile takeover attempt targeting Adrian's company. The name tied to the rumors? Henry Coldwell. That wasn't surprising. What was surprising was a second name attached to the negotiations, Evelyn Carter. Mia's pulse quickened. Evelyn, Adrian's trusted consultant. The woman who had dismissed her from the moment she stepped into the mansion. The woman who had everything to lose if Mia succeeded in helping Oliver. Heart-pounding, Mia clicked deeper into the reports. Evelyn had been secretly communicating with Caldwell's firm, subtly pushing Adrian towards signing a lucrative but dangerous contract. The only thing standing in her way? Mia. It all made sense now. By discrediting Mia, Evelyn had accomplished 2 things. She got rid of the one person who was proving that traditional therapy wasn't the only answer for Oliver, and she manipulated Adrian into distrusting those closest to him, leaving him vulnerable to pressure. Mia swallowed hard, her mind racing. Adrian had been played. And she had the proof to expose it. Grabbing her phone, she snapped a screenshot of the emails and sent a message to the one person who needed to see it most. Mia, I know who set me up. Meet me. I can prove it. She stared at the screen waiting, hoping. A minute later, a single reply appeared. Adrian, where? Mia stood outside Adrian's office, her fingers curled tightly around the folder of evidence. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but she forced herself to stay steady. She had spent days uncovering the truth, piecing together emails, financial reports, and private correspondences that all led to one undeniable conclusion: she had been framed. And now, Adrian was going to hear it whether he wanted to or not. The receptionist barely had time to announce her before Mia pushed open the heavy glass doors. Adrian was at his desk, deep in thought, but the moment he looked up and saw her, his expression hardened. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice clipped. Mia didn't flinch. Instead, she strode forward and dropped the folder onto his desk. "You were wrong about me," she said, meeting his gaze head-on. "And I can prove it." Adrian hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the folder. Mia. Just look, Adrian, she interrupted, her voice firm but not pleading. Before you say another word, before you throw me out again, look at what's inside. He exhaled sharply, but opened the folder. Silence stretched between them as he scanned the documents. Emails from Evelyn Carter to Henry Caldwell. Transaction records. Strategic memos detailing how to push Adrian towards signing the contract. Mia watched as realization dawned on his face. His grip on the papers tightened. She used you, Mia said quietly. She needed me gone so you'd feel isolated. So you'd trust her instead. Adrian looked up, his expression unreadable. But this time, there was something else behind his eyes, regret. I didn't want to believe it, he admitted, his voice lower now. But I did. Mia swallowed hard. And because of that, you pushed away the one person who actually cared about Oliver. Adrian's jaw tensed. He exhaled slowly, then, after a long pause, whispered, I was wrong. Mia didn't respond. She had already known that. The real question was, what was he going to do about it? Adrian sat in silence, his fingers resting against the edge of the damning documents Mia had placed before him. The truth was laid out in black and white. Evelyn had manipulated him, had planted seeds of doubt that he had been all too willing to believe. And in doing so, he had pushed away the one person who had truly been there for Oliver. He looked up at Mia, who stood across from him, arms crossed, her expression guarded. She had every right to be furious. Every right to walk away and never look back. Adrian exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. I was wrong, he admitted, his voice quieter than before. I let my own fears and distrust cloud my judgment. And I hurt you in the process. Mia didn't say anything. She just waited, watching him with those steady, unwavering eyes. I've spent my whole life trusting numbers, logic, facts, Adrian continued, shaking his head. But when it came to something I couldn't measure, something like music, I shut it out. I told myself it wasn't real, that it couldn't help Oliver. But it did. He let out a heavy breath. And instead of seeing that, I let someone else convince me that you had ulterior motives. Mia's jaw tightened, but she finally spoke. You didn't even give me a chance to defend myself. I know. He met her gaze, his voice raw with regret. And I'm sorry, Mia. Truly. Silence stretched between them. For the first time, Adrian felt something unfamiliar, vulnerability. He was a man who never apologized, who never second-guessed himself. But this time, he had been wrong, and he wasn't afraid to admit it. Mia studied him for a long moment. Then, with a small sigh, she shook her head. It's not me you need to make it up to. Adrian knew exactly what she meant. It wasn't about them. It was about Oliver. Mia sat across from Adrian once more, though this time, the energy in the room had shifted. Gone was the cold skepticism, the sharp-edged distrust. Instead, there was something else, an unspoken understanding. Adrian leaned forward, his fingers interlocked on the table. I don't just want you to come back for Oliver, he said. I want you to do something bigger. Mia frowned slightly, unsure of what he meant. Bigger. He nodded. I've been thinking about this for a while, long before you came into our lives. There are thousands of kids out there like Oliver. Kids who feel isolated, who don't respond to traditional therapy, who are lost in a world that doesn't know how to reach them. He exhaled. I've donated to charities, sponsored programs, but none of it felt personal, none of it felt like it actually made a difference. Mia listened in silence, her heart pounding slightly as she began to piece together what he was about to say. Adrian met her gaze. I want you to run a music program for children with disabilities. Not just for Oliver, for all the kids out there who need what he needed. Mia blinked, caught off guard. You want me to run it? You, Adrian confirmed. You saw what music did for Oliver, how it pulled him back, even in the smallest way. You're the only person I trust with this. Mia leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed by the weight of what he was offering. This wasn't just a job, it was a calling. But was she ready for it? I don't know, she admitted, chewing on her bottom lip. I'm not a therapist. I don't have a degree in music education. I'm just, she hesitated, trying to find the right words. Adrian gave her a small, knowing smile. A street musician? Mia exhaled a soft laugh. Yeah, exactly. His expression turned serious. You're also the person who got through to Oliver when no one else could. You don't need a degree for that. Mia lowered her gaze, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of her coffee cup. A part of her wanted to say yes right away, but another part hesitated. This was so much bigger than anything she had ever done before. Teaching Oliver had been personal, intimate. Now, Adrian was asking her to reach hundreds, maybe thousands of children who felt just as lost. Could she really do that? She looked back up at Adrian, searching his face for any sign of doubt, but there was none. He believed in her. More than that, he believed in what music could do. Mia took a slow breath. She might not have all the answers now, but one thing was clear, this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about something bigger than she had ever imagined. She wasn't ready to say yes. But she wasn't ready to say no either. I need some time to think, she finally said. Adrian nodded. Take all the time you need. But deep down, Mia already knew. She wasn't walking away from this. The house was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that felt peaceful rather than empty. Mia walked through the grand hallway, her footsteps light against the polished floor. She had just finished tidying up some music sheets in the practice room when a faint sound drifted through the corridors, a soft, uncertain melody coming from the grand piano in the living room. She paused. That wasn't unusual. She had played on that piano many times before, trying to coax Oliver into interacting with her. But this wasn't her playing. Curious, she stepped closer, careful not to make a sound. As she reached the doorway, the sight before her made her heart tighten. Oliver sat at the piano bench, his small hands pressing gently against the keys. His movements were hesitant, as if he were still discovering the music hidden beneath his fingertips, but there was no mistaking it, he was playing. And beside him, Adrian sat in quiet stillness, watching his son with an expression Mia had never seen before. Not worry. Not frustration. Just awe. Oliver finished the phrase and glanced at his father, his fingers still hovering above the keys. That was, Adrian exhaled, shaking his head slightly. He looked at his son as if seeing him for the first time. That was beautiful, Oliver. The boy didn't speak, but he didn't have to. The way his lips curled into the slightest smile, the way his eyes brightened ever so slightly, that was enough. Mia stood in the shadows, watching the moment unfold, her throat tightening with emotion. For weeks, she had fought to reach Oliver, to help him find his voice through music. But in this moment, she realized something even more important. He wasn't just finding himself. He was finding his father, too. Adrian, the man who had spent years searching for solutions in research papers and medical journals, now sat completely still, captivated by something so simple yet so profound. A song. A connection. A moment. Mia felt a tear prick at the corner of her eye, but she quickly wiped it away, smiling softly. For all his wealth, for all the things money could buy, this small but powerful moment between father and son, was something Adrian had never been able to purchase. Because sometimes, healing didn't come from medicine or grand gestures. Sometimes, it came from something as simple as a melody played by small, hesitant fingers. And a father finally listening. Mia took a quiet step back, leaving them to their moment. Her job here wasn't done yet. But tonight, she knew, Oliver was going to be just fine. Life has a way of teaching us that not all wounds can be healed with money, medicine, or logic. Sometimes, what the heart needs is not a solution, but a connection. In this story, Adrian Montgomery, a man who built his empire on numbers and certainty, learned that true healing does not come from control, but from understanding. His son, Oliver, did not need expensive therapies to bring him back to life. He needed someone who saw him, who listened, who understood the silent language of his heart. Mia, a simple street musician, had no credentials, no prestige. Yet, with patience and kindness, she reached the boy in a way no expert ever could. This is a reminder for all of us, especially those who have lived long enough to see life's complexities. Healing, love, and connection often come from the simplest of gestures. A song. A shared silence. A hand that doesn't force, but simply offers. We spend so much time searching for answers in grand solutions, but sometimes, what we truly need has been there all along. A little patience, a little music, and a heart willing to listen.